how to avoid making painting mistakes. Now, these are 5 easy art ideas in avoiding making sure that your painting does not become a disaster. So in this video, I want to talk about these 5 mistakes that I've noticed my art students have made in the classes, and certainly some of the questions that they have been asking as I have been teaching how to paint. Now, if we've never met before, of course, welcome to this art zone. My name is Mirjana Persakis and I'm a full-time oil painter. Love working with oil. I love painting people and their portraits. And of course, I incredibly love sharing art information for any art guru out there that wants to start to learn how to paint or start their journey of becoming a full-time artist. And I strongly believe, deep down believe, that every single person has an art guru inside them and is able to bring that out, which is what all these videos are all about. So if the information resonates with you, please do share, like, comment, and of course, I'd love to see one of those wow faces that comes across the screen. Please feel free to click on that. And similarly, I'd love to know where you guys are from and where this video is reaching, because I know I've got a couple of wonderful people that are tuning in from India. My love to you, and from the USA, and I certainly think there's somebody from Germany. I'm not quite sure, but nonetheless, pop in a comment and say, hey, I'm from here. Love to hear from you. At the same time, if there is a person that you know that has always talked about being an artist and doing art and wanting to start to do art, pop them in the comments below, get them interested and get their juices flowing in thinking about how they can go forward and become artists themselves. And certainly in today's 5 easy art ideas, they will give them a good art foundation to begin thinking about how they can start their journey. And if you are on the middle part of your journey in becoming an artist, I hope that these ideas inspire you to perhaps maybe change direction and think about how you can enhance what you're doing in your studio with a new perspective. So have a new direction with how you create art. So let's get to it. 5 mistakes that I have noticed beginner artists start to make. Number 1 is composition. Now, to achieve a strong composition, you have to have a goal. What do you want to achieve? This is normally the question that I always ask myself. What is it that I want to create or bring out in this painting? That's really important. Too many beginner artists always focus on wanting to paint every single detail of an artwork, the leaves, the branches, the details of a tree trunk as an example. At the same time, if they're using a photograph as a reference, they also focus all of their energy in making sure that they copy every single detail out of that photograph. That doesn't actually make for a strong composition. So if you want to begin that thinking process, emotional process of what a strong composition looks like, you must first ask yourself, what do I want to achieve? And that question really comes down to, do I want to create a happy mood? Do I want to tell somebody where to look? And therefore maybe the photograph that I'm using might not be as appropriate, but it's a good guideline, which is what I always tell my students. Okay, so that's part of the composition structure. The other thing, of course, is focus. Where are you directing the focus of your viewer? This is really important too. There are also what I call dynamic points that you can start to create in a landscape, and I'll show you those in a second. But also you need to start to think about elements. What are the elements that I am introducing in this artwork? So of course, if there's a windy day like it is today and my door's absolutely shaking, then you want to perhaps think about how you're going to introduce that wind in your composition. So if you've got trees that are moving really, back and forth, or if you're doing a streetscape, for example, and there are no trees, you could be in a country that you're painting without any trees on the street, then you've got to think about using directional lines in order to guide the viewer. So again, this is still part of a composition, which is really important. Number 2, in terms of mistake that I see, this is a real easy one, and yet I keep on seeing over and over again, is that students come to the class with cheap materials. Now, materials, I know they can be incredibly expensive. However, if you start to come into a class with a brush that only has 2 strands on it, or oil paint that actually does not serve the purpose of painting because it's too oily or the pigment is not strong enough, then what you will find is that you will not be able to achieve that strength or that movement in your work. So you want to think about the materials that you come into a class, that they're at least a medium level quality. And this is really, really important, because a lot of the frustration that I see in my classes are students always say, but I can't get the same color as what you do. And that simply comes down to the pigment and the quality of the binding oil that's within those oil tubes. So again, real simple one, but it really is important to start off with good materials. Number three in the painting mistakes that people make, or beginner artists tend to make, is of course lack of understanding of geometry. This is really another incredible strong foundational point. For example, in portraits, if you're looking at portraits, the geometric foundation that's really important for an artist to understand is this one concept, that every single aspect of our face lines up from the ears to the epicanthus, inner folds of our nose, just the corners of our mouth, etc. Now, when you begin to actually look into that ideology of what a portrait looks like from a geometric perspective, you will then start to understand that a portrait is becoming like a separate plane, and that's what gives it that roundness. So really important to start to understand geometry in a portrait. And again, I'd love to be able to give you guys so much more information around this, but I'm wanting to highlight what you need to go and look at. So again, the third point of 5 art ideas, mistakes that people make, is that geometry, or lack of understanding in geometry. Similarly, how to set up a still life. That's also another aspect of, where I see students getting frustrated because they're not wanting to understand, again, how geometry plays an important part in setting up that still life. For example, the use of negative and positive space. That's another point to consider. How to find interest in a landscape. This is even though people think, well, what do you mean, how does geometry play in a landscape? If you're going out to paint, for example, on plein air or outdoor painting, every person that I've spoken to and start to talk to me, they find it difficult to focus on a particular area. Now, this is, of course, where I start to utilize, the little cheat sheets, if you like, and they're called viewfinders. Now, these are viewfinders that I've made myself, and I'm just going to hold them up so you guys can see them. There you go. So when you're going out into a landscape, what you can do is you hold that up, and you can see a clear plastic is on that, and I'll explain what the marking is on that plastic. But this is a tool that will aid you in making sure that you focus on your landscape. Because remember, as humans, we are able to see a 180-degree view, and so it can be a little bit challenging to hone in on what exactly you want to paint. So viewfinders are very important and easy tool to utilize. Now, the other thing, of course, is I talked about just briefly before dynamic points, and what a dynamic point is, and this is where the viewfinder and this drawing comes in handy. Dynamic points, for example, this is another geometry. For example, I'll hold that close like that, and where you see these red dots, now these red dots are called dynamic points. Now that's what I've drawn on my viewfinder, as you can see up here, and you can kind of tell that there's black dynamic points. And so when I go out to paint, I take those viewfinders with me, and then I employ those dynamic points to make sure that I can find points of interest. And so in understanding geometry, you begin to then have a far easier process and method in being able to create artworks that are interesting. So point number 3, of course, is you must come and understand, you must educate, upskill yourself in how geometry plays an important part in artworks. I want you to also just think about phi ratio as well. Now, I've mentioned phi, which is PHI, eye ratio, and that's what this particular drawing is up here. And you'll see that phi ratio, there's a couple of squares on there. And I think Titian was one of the artists that has used phi ratio in his landscapes and created again that viewpoint for the viewer, or a point of interest for the viewer to be able to focus on. So again, think about the geometry, really, really important. Now, line work as well plays an incredible part in artworks. And again, people, you know, if you're thinking about what do you mean about line work? In a landscape in particular, if you tend to use a brush or a palette knife, it doesn't really matter, but you're painting continually on a horizontal manner, what you're doing is you're creating line works that are continually that parallel lines. Now, when you're thinking about geometry, in order to break those parallel lines, what you want to do is create a vertical line that will cut through all those different line works. So that's when you introduce a vertical component. And of course, with landscapes, if you've got a really, really distant landscape where you're starting off in the foreground, middle ground, and background, you will tend to have a lot of horizontal line work. And you'll see some artworks put in a very tall tree, and there's your vertical line, which breaks up that horizontal, those horizontal lines. That becomes monotonous after a while. So again, geometry plays an incredibly important part in creating an interesting artwork and avoiding those art mistakes of becoming dull or non-interesting. Shapes as well play an incredibly important part. Now, here's a little fact that I wanted you guys to know, and perhaps maybe, I don't know if you've heard it before. Circles and are shapes that have an equal portion. Okay, so circle, basically an equal portion, and they are considered a stationary shape, whereas triangles are considered a moving shape in an artwork. This is really weird because from a human interactive mindset, we see a circle or something as a ball or a balloon and it's always moving. That's because when you're looking at artwork, we're talking about creating from a 1D into a 3D artwork. So it's not like we're playing with a ball with paint, if that makes sense. So again, when you're thinking about geometry, you're wanting to understand how these shapes play a part in the artwork that you're creating. Now, number 4 of the most important mistakes that I see a lot of people make is, of course, mixing colors. And I talked about this before. I mean, I could talk about mixing colors forever. But really, mixing colors, if you start off with 3 primary colors, what you'll end up happening is you will end up becoming your own paint factory. This is incredibly important because when you start to understand and learn how to mix from the primary colors, create secondary tones, tertiary tones, then you have a far more wide range and a wider capability in being able to direct the beginning question that we started off with, which was, what is the goal that I want to achieve? Super, super important. And of course, when you're looking at colors and what I started to observe in a lot of the students that are coming through, they're not really understanding the terminology of value, intensity, and temperature. This is another thing that's incredibly important because, of course, when you understand values, you start to then paint from that perspective. And values really, the definition of value is how dark or light something is. And so when you start to just think about in terms of value, intensity, and temperature, that's how you begin to also mix the colors. Because, for example, if you're painting a landscape and you're wanting a distant hill to be painted, then what you want to do is you think, well, okay, how dark is that hill? How intense is the color of that hill? And is it in the distance, which means I'm going to be painting it in a cool tone. So again, thinking about colors and how colors play an important part and beginning to understand your way of mixing from 3 primaries will make your painting journey incredibly easy. Last but not least, the 5th idea to make sure that your artwork is not a disaster is, of course, emotion. Now, this is my most valued aspect of painting. Emotion, emotion, emotion. I started off at the beginning, and that was the first point that I made, that you have to make or have a goal, and how is it that you want to create something? Well, this is where the emotion aspect of creating comes into play. Now, of course, when you know what you want to create, you also now begin to think about in the type of temperature, i.e. what is a cool or a warm color that I want to create. So let's say, for example, you want to create a sunny day. So of course, you want to now employ the color yellow. But if you want to create something that is somber and sad and deep, then you're thinking towards more the emotions of dark and more less intense colors. If you wanted to create a calm mood, for example, you want to now think about something that is cool and relaxing. So again, temperature plays an incredibly important part in artwork, but you have to understand the emotion that you want to employ in your artwork in order to make your goal or what you set out to achieve actually come to fruition. So I hope that you guys enjoyed that, these 5 simple art processes that you can start to employ in your studio and make your artworks a little bit probably less mistakey, is that a word? Or at least not actually tear out your canvas and scribble the artwork if you're not happy with it. I want to quickly acknowledge Jagdish. Thank you again for watching. Really appreciate you tuning in. I hope this is inspiring you and giving you a step forward to perhaps begin putting your brush to canvas, or even if it's a pencil to paper. Remember that take small steps. You don't have to, go and create these big artworks. Just a small piece of paper and even a pen is all you need to begin the steps of painting. I know you guys can do it. I know Jagdish, you can do it. Certainly small steps, even if it's 30 minutes a day. I wanted to also ask you if you guys feel that you want to have certain art topics that you wanted me to discuss. Really would love to do that for you. Comment below as to what particular topics you would like to cover. And, what is it that you find challenging with artworks? What is it that you have found that you got stuck in an artwork and just have not been able to move out of that particular stuckness, or have found it so frustrating that it just has not been making sense into which direction you need to go? So certainly happy to help you guys with that as well next week. So from here forward, I will definitely be doing these live sessions every single Tuesday at 1 p.m. unless something drastic happens and my internet goes out, but certainly will definitely be joining you guys every Tuesday at 1 p.m. I thank you wholeheartedly for tuning in. I thank you for watching and for your support. And by all means, I hope that the information that I just shared with you is able to guide you into a new direction. And if you find that tomorrow you want to begin, you're going into your studio and you would like to begin a different direction, by all means, take that step forward, even if it feels a little bit scary or it feels a little bit uncomfortable. This is just your body saying that I'm not really ready for a change. But know in your heart, the minute you take that step forward, you would definitely uncover something that will excite you, exhilarate you, and give you a new energy in how you create your own artwork. Thank you guys. I love you and appreciate your support. Until next time, stay wonderful, create, and remember that you are 1 out of 7 billion, and that's an incredibly unique point to be in. So always be yourself and always go forward and live the dream that I know is within you, and that every single person has got an art guru inside of them. I know that. I know that. I love you all. Stay cool, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye.